It's probably a little bit of an obscure subject for a few of you. I don't know how many of you have gone out and actually purchased a semiconductor wafer fab or back end, front end, or a infrastructure-rich clean room in the world. When we started looking at this in 1998, the Japanese were the ones who were actually confronting that issue when DRAM prices fell quite significantly and they started pulling back to Japan. And KPMG sought us out to get involved in one up in Puyallup, Washington. And from getting involved with that fab, we really just started figuring out what was needed for companies from a standpoint of the tool sets that were sitting on the floor to how long it took to qualify those lines to having supply agreements, et cetera. Motorola in the old days would just go in and typically knock them down. ATREG started helping companies in essence look at and realize there was value in those secondhand, what we call brownfield facilities. And as the foundry industry took off, more and more those secondhand fabs became really valuable for companies. So let's make sure I get this right. We started, and we've been involved with a lot of different transactions for and on behalf of companies. And I just threw a couple of these up there to really just give you a little bit of context. It's things like TI's fab in Greenock, Scotland that we just recently sold to Diodes. It's on Semiconductor, assisting them to purchase a 300 millimeter facility, the former IBM fab in Fishkill that we just got finished in April. We assisted Vanguard to purchase Global Foundries, 3E fab, a former Hitachi fab in Singapore. We just got that finished this quarter. And then other transactions with companies like Renesas, for example, who after the bailout from the Japanese government and the automotive companies, they were required to get rid of 4 of their manufacturing facilities. And ATREG was hired to come into Japan and assist in selling off some of those assets. We're going to touch on a few things, so how does one go out and, take a look at the market, analyze, evaluate from both on an internal, external level, wafer fabs and back end or front end. What effect is China having on that process today in terms of manufacturing? It's big in the news from a geopolitical standpoint. And we thought we'd touch on automotive just a little bit. It's certainly big for all of you and in what's happening on the assembly and test side. I think it's certainly well known what has been happening within the industry from a standpoint of M&A activity. We've been increasing from year to year and have moved from 38 billion in sales in 17 to 42, if I better put my glasses on here, 48 actually, to we're at 25 billion already this year, and looks like we're gonna exceed 2018. That said, in terms of manufacturing facilities playing a role in that, in 2018 we had a huge slowdown. It was the first time in 20 years we had no manufacturing facilities that were bought or sold. A real surprise for us as we've been charting this going back to 1998. And we say that with also a knowledge that in terms of operational fabs, there's been a huge lack of 200 millimeter within the broader ecosystem. One company has in fact said we need 9 more 200 millimeter fabs. And some of you, I'm sure, have noted recently both TSMC and Samsung are building brand new 200 millimeter wafer fabs today. We've also got a shortage of 200 millimeter tools within the market, and some of the OEMs are really going back into the business to produce equipment to enable this type of expansion. With that shortage in capacity, we've also seen companies starting to make a move to look at possible greenfield opportunities that are out there. And Bosch announced the big one over in Germany. Infineon's got another one in Graz. Austria. TI just, in the last 2 months have announced that they're going to actually expand in Richardson. We were representing TI in that analysis over the last 2 years as we've looked at opportunities. They really would have preferred a brownfield. At the end of the day, we just couldn't put that deal together for them because there's such a limited amount of those that exist in the world today. So taking a look at, the supply that does exist out there, these graphs show you a little bit, the growth over time since 1995 of 300 millimeter facilities, 200 millimeter facilities, and 150 millimeter facilities. That, today, 300 for a long time, we're at about 100 fabs. That's now moved up to about 125 wafer fabs today. The crossover point in terms of capacity, as you'll see on that second graph, was about 2006, 2007, when 300 millimeter capacity started to outstrip 200 millimeter capacity. Oh, so sorry, we are. Did I speed ahead? I'm so sorry. I was trying to time my notes here with the ones. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you very much. So that crossover point took place in 2007, 2008. And I think the other thing to say too, there's more capacity coming up with the needs for specialty fab and wafer manufacturing. Silicon carbide, MEMS, sensor devices are all becoming really important, and companies are looking at, where are we going to go in terms of that. I think a lot of people have expected over the years here that foundry would be, taking up a majority of that, but as I'll show with a few more slides, I think some of that is being rethought a little bit today. Looking at it from a standpoint of, the OSAT market and where things are at, the industry is really controlled by our three big companies. 65% of the industry is really controlled by Amkor, SE, and JSET. And I think for OSATs, moving forward in the future, if you're not in those top 8 companies, there's a need to really, pursue perhaps other opportunities with respect to revenue and growth. And I'm going to touch on consolidation a little bit here too, which is an important element taking place in the industry. Advanced packaging, also equally important within the industry. Over half of total packaging will be on the advanced side by 2024. And the compound annual growth rate has significantly increased in terms of that. And we're seeing, revenues increasing by upwards of 43% here by 2024. So all said, what does that do from a standpoint of, where are OSAT facilities being located? Well, you're probably not surprised to know that 80% of that growth for and where OSAT facilities exist today is in Asia. 50% of those facilities are really in Taiwan and China. And you'll notice our thin little slice there for North America. It's not as significant as it should be, but that may be changing in light of some of the geopolitics taking place today. Looking at fabs over the last 8 years, just by facility type, looking at back end and front end, you'll note, front end is transactions are double typically what back end transactions are. You'll also note 2018 where we had no activity the first time in 20 years. But you're probably not too surprised that there's not a lot of these transactions that happen during a given year. 3 in 2015, 5 have just taken place this year in 2019, and most of those were all done within the first quarter. In terms of looking at it from a standpoint, by regions, again, back end is about a third of what is happening in terms of front end, and again, showing it, where these fabs have gone by region. We've got, one located in North America, and the balance are all located over in Asia. What's this mean from a standpoint of just overall manufacturing strategy and financial investment considerations for companies? It's a big thing for a company to go out and to purchase a facility. It can actually have negative impact because it's such a drag on the balance sheet, and oftentimes analysts are looking at that saying, is that the best place to be able to put your money? TI, who's really one of the bellwethers of the industry, have shown people that actually, continuing to have manufacturing capacity that they control is really important, and they've done it by purchasing secondhand facilities. ATREG's helped them in about 3 of those major acquisitions that have been really transformational, and we just recently helped on Semiconductor do the same thing by picking up a 300 millimeter fab in New York. Nonetheless, the lack of supply and the high demand for fabs, for equipment, is having a big impact on the market, and we're starting to now see some real premium prices being paid. But a secondhand fab can still be purchased for about 1/3 of what it's going to cost to go out and build a new fab facility today. And if one is able to secure those tools, and on the 300 millimeter side, we've got excess tool capacity, not quite the same thing with 200 millimeter tools. So what's another key factor that goes into making these facilities and this manufacturing work? Actually, it's time to market in terms of being able to bring your products up. If you build a brand new fab, you've got an 18-month time period, unless you're in Taiwan, where they're doing a number of these every quarter and bringing them up within 12 months. But it's 18 months to just build a facility. It's another 18 months to get that thing fitted out and then to get your product up and qualified. Versus if you take an existing facility and introduce your product in while the seller is reducing. And that is something that happened with, in these 4 transactions here. Micron had a former fab owned by Elpida, and when they took it over, they had to wait a few years to sell it. Ultimately, they sold it off to PowerTech. Initially, they only wanted to provide a 1-year supply agreement, but they ultimately provided a 3-year supply agreement to really make that deal go forward. It enabled PowerTech to take it on, not go into the red, qualify their product, and we ended up keeping 310 people working there. Similar things with Texas Instruments and Diodes. TI and their Greenock facility only wanted to provide a year of loading there, but ultimately provided 2.5 years of loading to enable that Diodes deal to go forward. And Keishu Liu, who was becoming a little uncomfortable with the amount of manufacturing they had in China, jumped at the opportunity to control a 150 millimeter fab where 40% of the loading was already 200 millimeter. Other external factors are what's happening in terms of global competition and what's happening in terms of consolidation. A lot of companies are turning to consolidation as a way to grow revenue and to grow capacity. And as noted here with just the top 10 companies within the industry, this industry is approaching $600 million in revenue. These top 10 companies control almost $200 million of that revenue. But consolidation has really come on strong over the last 3 to 5 years, as indicated by all of the M&A activity, and I think it will continue to happen, not unlike what took place in the aviation industry, the telecommunications industry. We're going to continue to see a shrinking here. That said, what does that mean with regard to the current geopolitical situation today? We're in a little bit of unknown territory, if you will. Trump's moves with respect to China and the tariffs have really started to create some uncertainty and unease. Some of the IP issues, which are, currently out there and being worked through, are all being looked at in a number of different ways. And just in this last 12 months, we've seen Malaysia become a major center for manufacturing, with a 1,300% jump in investment there. And we can tell you from a standpoint of, opportunities that we're representing out there in the market right now, we've got a 200 millimeter automotive qualified fab that we've had a number of Chinese buyers taking a look at. It sits here in the United States, and it's just truly persona non grata as far as CFIUS is concerned today. So the apple cart is really being upset. A lot of things are being looked at in terms of what's going to happen with manufacturing. I think certain companies like Global Foundries, who don't have a huge amount of manufacturing in China, are looking at this as an opportunity. Other companies, are being hurt by the restrictions being placed on Huawei. And I don't think we're going to know exactly how this is going to play out probably for the next 12 to 24 months, but it's happening as we speak. And some of that means that we may be seeing a focus on some of these other factors today. IP protection is a real big one that companies are very cognizant of, and which companies are looking at. We assisted Bosch and finished that up about 20 months ago, as they looked at where they should locate another facility outside of Germany, and where they had Reutigen. Ultimately, the decision got made to stay in Germany because it was Merkel's election, and her husband happens to be a Saxony government official. So the opportunity that we had laid out for them here in the United States, did not take place. UMC currently is in a significant litigation with Micron in terms of IP in China right now. The rumor on the street is that there's probably going to be a $1.5 to $2 billion fine for that. We're already hearing about a number of customers who are, looking at hedging their bets and diversifying their risk. Local supply chain is another important factor when you're looking for a facility. Where are you going to have employment, and a broad array of services within that supply chain to really assist you with your overall project. And then talent, recruitment, availability of people. Places like here within the United States, ecosystems in Oregon, down in Texas, in upstate New York, are where there's really significant supply chains, and they're playing off that today to see if they can attract more business and manufacturing coming forward. Looking at local incentives, I just referenced, really quickly, New York State. This is probably the best area within the United States, and as far as incentives are concerned. And you've got, going back to 35, almost 40 years, Republican and Democratic administrations, New York has provided really, really good incentives for people to locate there. Texas is another, key area within the United States. On the international front, Singapore has always been a big leader, and they've got a very significant semiconductor ecosystem. And of course, China has been very prominent over the last few years. We're seeing a stall in that right now, and we may see, I think, areas like Korea and Taiwan really moving forward to take some of that other business. Looking at a spotlight on China, what's happening there today is really affecting a lot of major decisions. This, slide shows where some of the advanced or the packaging and advanced packaging is. Most of it is along that eastern band of China, and but it's also interesting to note too that IC design continues to remain really prominent in China. I think that the jury's out in terms of what will happen long term in terms of advanced capacity continuing for Western companies in China. It's also fair to say that Western companies are making some of these other decisions, as I noted earlier, with Infineon, Bosch, Texas Instruments, and others. Also, Samsung announcing huge, big CapEx spending and manufacturing increases taking place within their countries. Spotlight on automotive. I think it goes without saying that the electronic vehicle industry has been a real major driver within semiconductor industry. It's expected to surpass 1.63 trillion in the next few years. As a result, test and packaging is a really critical growth area. And we're looking at this from a lot of different angles. ATREG, we're just recently out assisting a company with a 400,000 square foot acquisition. We ended up identifying 8 locations that they could go to in China. As they came down to the final decision here in the last 6 months, they chose to go to the Philippines, and it was really due to the geopolitics of what is happening in the market today. So to finish up here, really key takeaways for a successful fab and a site selection. What are the key things that one needs to take a look at? It's not always clear inside of companies, particularly with all the verticals that exist and where the responsibilities lie of who's making the decision, but gaining corporate alignment is really, really beneficial if one can do that within a company. Carefully weighing the pros and cons for a new greenfield, versus buying a brownfield. And we're moving to a point today where just the supply of existing fabs has diminished so much that greenfield is really coming back to the fore. I think we're going to see that for a lot of the specialty manufacturing needs that take place. And finally, time to market is a really critical factor, and if one can negotiate supply agreements that coincide with that, it really enables for successful projects. And the big companies have used that, Texas Instruments probably being the biggest of them all in terms of expanding their capacity through taking on secondhand manufacturing. That brings us to the end of our presentation. ATREG has been, very involved in these types of deals and in assisting with the industry over the years. I think, given the way this year started with 5 significant transactions, we were involved in 3 of them. I think we're going to see a repositioning here in this next 24 months in terms of what happens with the placement of large manufacturing. So I'll stop there and take any questions.
Questions?